exactly. My name is Michiel, and this is Robin. Robin is also a host of this conference, or a moderator, or whatever how you like to call it. Um, I'd like to introduce her first because she is now a mental health entrepreneur. She had a really nice job at Philips, and within Philips, she developed relationships with people in Africa where they worked on mental health. And now they had this startup within Philips. They took it out of Philips to really go and dive in the deep. And she is an experienced host. So she has 4 years of art of hosting training. So she knows how to guide you and how to keep you quiet and how to have you enjoy your conference, actually. So yeah, Robin, nice that you're here.
Thank you very much, Michiel. So he puts expectations very, very high now. So now I'm super nervous, man. What are you doing? But I also have the honor to introduce him, of course. So Michiel, he's working in his daily life to help people that work on social projects to be much more effective. So if you're working on a social project and you need help, make sure to find him. And also, more importantly for today, he's a very experienced host. He hosts a lot of events. And he's also an EA lover, I could say, I think. Yeah. Yes. So let's start now. Now we've had the introductions. This is already the second day of the conference. Who of you has been there yesterday? That's a lot. Those are the diehards. Michiel, you've been there too. Can you tell us something?
Yeah, so I saw everybody eating their spicy food and was like, oh, I can't handle this. But what we really saw is already the connections when you bring the right group of people together. We had the most beautiful conversations, or really deep ones that you don't really find at other conferences. So this is also what makes this conference really special. And today and tomorrow we're going to explore the most effective and evidence-based ways to improve the world, but also to connect like-minded individuals and create a community that strengthens each other to make more positive impact. And the theme of today is, and tomorrow is, stay curious. So we have really beautiful speakers, but we also all have different talents and backgrounds. And we believe that with all of us here, we can really make a big impact on our own lives, but also on the rest of the world. But only if we are staying curious. So, yeah, welcome everybody.
Yes, and of course today you're gonna really interact with a lot of experts. You're gonna learn a lot. You're gonna have very deep discussions. And we thought about how can we be this more effective? How can we bring this beyond the people that are here? So we wanted to ask you to share, at least each of you, share 2 insights that you have today that really changed the way you think. Share them on social media. So you go beyond this room and share it with the world out there. Also, oh yeah, also of course, because we want to really start interacting, we want to get to know who are you a little bit. So I want to ask, who of you is actually an entrepreneur? And can you stand up if you are? So these are the entrepreneurs in the room. Yes, nice. Can sit down again. Who of you are students? I expected this. Okay, sit down. Who of you are researchers? Oh, it's also quite share a bit. And who of you works for a corporate? Some fellow guys. Good. Well done, guys. Okay, good to know you all. And also, I want to test your level of depth of EA knowledge. So, who of you has actually read the book of William McCaskill? I'm doing good, better. Okay, okay. So that's an introduction to a speaker later. Sit down. So as you see, we've got some experts here, guys. It's gonna be an intense day.
Cool. Now you can actually take your phones out if you have a phone, because we're gonna do one more fun thing with you to get some data. And you can go to menti.com, which is a website, and you fill in the code 556035. Does anybody not understand this? Raise your hand. We'll help you out. A little bit shy, I know. So is everybody here? We see people hitting the love button. You see it? Beautiful. 30, yeah, we're going really fast now. Exponential growth. Okay, we will go to the first question just to get you started a little bit, because we will use this tool also later in the conference. So later today, you will also get back to this tool to give some feedback and check in again. The first one is, which country are you from? We heard there's a lot of Germans here. And a lot of Dutch people, of course. Germany, big one. New Zealand. Who's here from New Zealand? That's a long, long way for you. Welcome. Holland. Scotland. Who is here from Scotland? Of course. Nobody else from Scotland. Wow. Europe. Yemen. Who is here from Yemen? Awesome, man. Welcome. Cool. So we have 108, 110 people already replied. We go to the next question. What is the one message you would write on the billboard that the entire world would see? So you can say only one thing on one big billboard. Everybody would see it. What would you say? Be kind, be kind. Help, I'm trapped in a billboard factory. Sentient billboard. Nice. We're gonna get back to this later again to see if you maybe change your mind on what you would write on the billboard. For the next question, we have, when will today and tomorrow be successful for you? So this is just to check in and see what you would like to do or learn those days. Is there anybody who answers the first? Did you already answer it? No. If I connect it with like-minded individuals. That's also the easiest one because it's already a successful weekend for you then. We got, if I learned new things and if I got my beliefs challenged, they're competing a little bit. If I change my life, it's not so important. It's also fine. If I learn new things, almost beating if I connected with like-minded individuals, or losing it. All right. This was really it for the start of the conference, because now we're gonna go directly into the content, and you have a full day of content. And we will get back to this later today and also tomorrow to figure out more about you guys. So thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you. So I have the honor to introduce for you the first keynote speaker that we have of today. So it's Sjeer Hoeimakers. And he's here in the fashion of the chairman and the founder of EA the Netherlands. He's also beyond that a dear friend. He's working for Founders Pledge in London, and he's also researching their gender equality. So I'm a big fan of Sjeer. Go Sjeer. And he's one of the best board game players I've ever known. So definitely talk to him. Sjeer, welcome.
Thank you. Wow. Yeah. Wow, this is cool. Thanks, Robin, for that nice introduction. Yeah. I also want to start by asking you some questions. You've asked a lot of questions already, but and they were mostly about what you already know. But I'm also curious, are there people here for whom this is their first EA-related event ever, the first EA-related conference. Who is that? Could you stand up? Could you stand up? Great. Look at that. Wow. Nice. Great you're all here. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks. Cool. And maybe an even harder question, but in a sense, very important one. Who came here alone and knows less than 5 people here? Could you stand up? Nice. Even more, a bigger hand to these people. Coming all the way out of here, learning new stuff. Cool. So, yeah, so my first EA-related conference was only 2 years ago. It was the Sentience conference in Berlin. Some of you might have been there. Actually, I know some of you have been there because I've become friends with some of you who've been there, so it was great. But I went there. I didn't know much about EA. I didn't know many people in EA in general. And Sentience conference was about the animal welfare kind of part of EA. So it was also completely new to me. I didn't know. I wasn't vegan. I felt like completely new there. But I went there to explore whether this was something for me. So maybe that sense was a bit like some of you are here today. And it surprised me positively, luckily, mostly. So one of the things I already said, I met a lot of really cool people there. And they were open to me. It wasn't too much of a big deal that I wasn't vegan yet. And no, it was really, it opened lots of my eyes for me. And the funny thing, so in kind of the theme of today, stay curious. One of the talks I remember best was his talk on this really weird topic to me then. I thought I'm just going to go here because this sounds odd and weird and I want to know more about it. It was about wild animal suffering. I had never heard about that before. It never crossed my mind that was a thing, that's something you could even think about. So I just thought, okay, this is going to be odd, interesting, so controversial. I'm just going to go there. But actually, when I went there, it was quite an interesting talk. And it was brought in some arguments that just changed my perspective. And I thought, wait, this might be something I should actually think about. And I hope that you'll have these experiences today as well, because that's something I really got most from these conferences as well. It's kind of in the learning new things style. So I really encourage you to also go to talks that you think like, this is odd, this is something I'd never think about, and learn about that. Yeah, so that time I was curious, luckily, but there's also been times in my life where I wasn't curious enough, I think. And it's not always easy to be curious enough about things you think you already know about, but you might not know about that much. So recently I was actually put on to this fact. Because I started working for Founders Pledge. I'm a researcher there now, and I was reading through the reports you've already written, my colleagues have written before. And one of these reports is on climate change. I mean, I knew a bit about climate change, and I was always interested in it. But I didn't know that much about what was the most effective way of tackling it. And to my surprise, one of the things that was discussed in that report, is just one of the things, but it was discussed in the report, was that probably we'll need quite a lot of nuclear power to do something about climate change. And I was like, wait. In my mind, up till now, always thinking about nuclear power had kind of a negative association. I knew that people demonstrated against these nuclear power plants. I had this association with nuclear weapons, obviously, and it being unsafe, and maybe it's bad for health because there's this waste and radiation poisoning and whatever. But then this report just laid out the argument, and it said something, for example, that I think by air pollution alone, fossil fuels were killing people, many more people than nuclear power. So I think there was this figure, up till 2009, there was like 1.8 million people have been saved by nuclear power because nuclear power replaced fossil fuels just by air pollution alone, not disregarding climate change at all, right? So this was something that surprised me so much because I had this negative association with it. And I was kind of forced to read it. So that was great, because otherwise I would have maybe never found out, because I hadn't looked into it myself. So for me, that was kind of a wake-up call again, which I come into sometimes, that there's probably many things in my mind as well that I still don't know, and that I shouldn't, that I should be more curious in that sense. So I hope to be that myself as well this weekend, and learn some new things from you as well. But I'm also very interested in what you guys are learning, because I think that's something, well, we are learning it sharedly, and maybe there's things we all hold, beliefs we all hold, that we're surprised about. So Rob and Michiel already introduced sharing things on social media. I'd also like to ask you if you wanted to share some of your stories with me. That would be great. Just come talk to me. Very happy to talk to you. But also you can send them by email. Can you bring up my email address? I think it was probably on the next slide. Yeah, great. So share at effectievaltruïsme.nl. I know it's tough Dutch stuff. So, and I'm serious about this. So I actually want to give you like 20 seconds now to take out your phone and write it down. So wait, let me first, who expects that this weekend will bring a perspective shift for them that's kind of important to them, or that's going to change their life? Can you please stand up if you expect that? Wow, nice. So you definitely should take out your phone and write down my email address, please. Address as well if you want. And just email me with anything that you change your mind about. It can be something like, it doesn't have to be something as big as like this nuclear power thing was for me, or it could also be something like the wild animal suffering was for me, like just a whole new area you never heard about before. And then I can also, because I'll be closing the conference as well, so I'll be happy to kind of see what I've learned by then and share that with you, back with you as well, so we can all learn about that together. Yeah, thanks. People are actually doing it, so I'll wait a bit. Okay, well, one more thing I want to share with you is about Effective Health in the Netherlands, which is people that are organizing it today. I have to say, I'm already very impressed, and don't thank me about this conference because I have had literally nothing to do with how amazing this is running. I'm just here to kind of welcome you because I now live in London, so I wasn't even able to be here before. And yeah, I guess this is for the closing speech. I should thank the organizing team at the closing speech, but I'm already impressed by them. I'm happy to be there. But about EAN in general, we've only existed for a bit more than a year now. We had a great launch event last year in the same place. So it's kind of a nice kind of looking back at that. But also, I mean, to be honest, it's not easy to figure out what an organization like Effective Health in the Netherlands should do. And I still feel like we're kind of walking through the dark and hitting lots of things. And we've tried out lots of different organizational models, strategies, and they all sounded great in the abstract. And we're like, yes, this is going to be it. And now we're going to really kind of get people together and get things going. But it wasn't easy. And so one more shout out I want to do to you is to really, especially people that are in the Netherlands, but also the people that are here from the international EA community, to think with us, what should the role be of an organization like Effective Health in the Netherlands? How should it place itself? And how can we best support you? And we is also you, obviously. It's a bit of a cliche, but in a sense, Effective Health in the Netherlands is just like a tool. It's not nothing in itself. It's about the EA community that's supposed to support. So I would really ask you, if you have any ideas what you want to do, please come to someone of the EAN team, talk to me, talk to Remmelt, who's around here, Stan Alje, or one of the organizers here, you'll see, or just any one of the volunteers. Talk about this, and if you have any ideas, I'm very happy to hear about them, because we are still also figuring out what we want to do, and I'm happy with the things we have done. Some of them, like that you're all here now, which I'm already excited about, but there's still so much to learn, so we also need to stay extremely curious with what we're doing. Okay, so those were some of the most important things I wanted to say. I don't want to talk too long because I don't want to keep you waiting for our next really amazing speaker. But there's one more last thing I guess I want to share with you. One personal thing that for me also tags into the Stay Curious team that I really love about the EA community, and which I hope will keep in it for a long time, forever, basically. It's this thing about EA that intrinsically, in how you connect with other people, you don't do that with judgment, but with curiosity. So EA is about how can we do the most good, right? And there's just simply no use in thinking about, oh, who is doing good the best, except for the fact that you can learn from them. There's no use in saying like, oh, you are doing better good than you are or something. That's just useless. It's not, and EA is kind of intrinsically in it. It's about trying to figure out who is doing the most good. So you're interested in other people because you want to learn from them. But also, it doesn't matter who does the good. It matters that it happens. So there's this really cool incentive in this kind of mindset that you want others to succeed. You want to help others, and that's one of the things I've really been loving about this community. And I hope we can have this weekend as well and really enjoy it together. So with that, I'll leave you. Thank you very much. I hope to meet a lot of you, and I'll see you around. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sheer. It's wonderful to have you back here as well. So for the rest of the day, we're going to do some things. We're first going to listen to a keynote speech, two actually. And in the afternoon, we will have breaks, and we will have drinks and food, and you can go to workshops and lectures and stuff. Who of you has seen the program? Raise your hand. Everybody, wonderful. If there's anything you really don't like or whatever, you can still change it right now. We are good at changing the program last minute. So is there anyone who says, nah, I don't like this keynote speech or whatever? Now? Beautiful. Because then I also invite you to not only say that you're okay with what's going on, but also to be really here. So not be distracted, not move your chairs around because they make a lot of noise, and really pay close attention to when Will is speaking, for example, because this is really going to change the setting of this event. And this is really going to be much more engaging if you're here. Okay? Beautiful. So then I'm really pleased to introduce Will McCaskill. I have to read this because he's done so many things. So he is, for example, the co-founder and the president of the Center for Effective Altruism. He's really one of the founding fathers of effective altruism in general. And he's an associate professor in philosophy at Oxford. He got this when he was 28. Who is 28 and is an associate professor? Nobody. Beautiful. So he also co-founded 80,000 Hours, a Y Combinator-backed non-profit that provides research and advice on how you can best make a difference through your career. I think many of us know 80,000 Hours as well. And maybe one thing that nobody of you knows, if you know it, please come to me afterwards and I will find a new thing next time. Because once upon a time, Will was a champion Boy Scout because he won the national competition of Scotland, the Boy Scout competition. So give him a big hand. Will McCaskill. You don't need this?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, welcome EAG Netherlands. Woo! Come on. And thank you everyone who stood up, who'd read the book. Those who didn't, got my eye on you. The theme of this conference is Stay Curious. And so to open out, I just want everyone to turn to the person to your side, especially if you don't know them, introduce yourself, and just kind of for 1 minute say something you feel kind of curious about or unsure about or would like to get more information on. So I'll give you that for one minute. Okay. Gonna have to start asking to bring the curiosity to a close just for the second. Okay, nice. Well, clearly there's a lot of curiosity in the room there. And what I'm going to talk about just now is about the idea of building a kind of curious, effective altruism community, what that means, and actually the challenges in doing so. So to set this up, there are two sorts of community that we could be trying to build. And I'm going to model this back using ancient Greece. So the first kind of community we could be trying to build is like ancient Sparta, one of the most militaristically dedicated cultures that has ever existed. And ancient Sparta, for those who didn't know, the entire economy was based around trying to produce the best possible army. And if you want to produce the best possible army, what do? Well, you have extreme conformity of beliefs, both in terms of what are the goals and what are the means to achieving that goal. You have extreme hierarchy in terms of having certain people who are the leaders. These are the people whose beliefs you follow, and then the people who follow them. And it's not their business to actually have ideas of their own. And so there's very little celebration to diversity of ideas in any way. The idea is instead you have conformity of beliefs. That means you can unify behind achieving one particular goal. In contrast, we can consider ancient Athens at the same time. This is exactly the opposite in some ways. This was a culture that prized intellectual inquiry, so therefore celebrated diversity and disagreement of beliefs rather than conformity. Socrates could take kind of any noble person on the streets of Athens and challenge them about their beliefs. And this is much less aiming towards a particular goal, but instead kind of pursuing inquiry for its own sake. And there's much less emphasis on kind of hierarchy instead. Anyone can challenge the status quo and come up with new ideas or criticize the ideas that kind of already exist. Now, what sort of community do we want to build? And you might think the answer is obvious. We want to be like Sparta because these guys look badass. Togas look ridiculous. Okay, given the theme of the conference is stay curious, you might think, oh, well, obviously that what this talk is about is building a community that's more like Athens and less like Sparta. And it is the case that there are some significant reasons why building a community like Athens is a great thing to do. Chief, of course, among them is just the chance that you might be wrong, whether in your aims, or in your ultimate ends, or in the aims that you're pursuing. So Shira mentioned this idea of nuclear power. So in the green movement, the kind of concern is mitigating climate change. But then at the same time, there seems to be this very widespread belief that's extremely kind of anti-nuclear power. At least in my view, from my perspective, that's kind of bizarre, because actually nuclear power is one of the best strategies we have for decreasing our kind of global carbon emissions. But if you've got this community that is emphasizing conformity of opinion a lot, then it's very hard to change your view if you make a mistake early on. Well, that gets cemented, that belief gets used as a kind of indication of membership in this community. And once you've got that, it's very hard to kind of change your view. So the fact that we might be completely confused about both what we're trying to do as a community and the means by which we're trying to do it is obviously a big reason in favor of being more like Athens. I mean, there are other benefits as well, potentially. You've got, potentially appealing to a much wider audience, because you've got, much wider array of views and perspectives to kind of choose from. And it's also potentially like less brittle as a community as well, because it's less likely that there's going to be kind of infighting over, narcissism of small differences, because people are just more comfortable with kind of disagreement. But this talk would be rather boring if it was just saying, well, be like Athens. Because I think there's significant disadvantages to this as well. In particular, have you ever tried to lead a group of philosophers, try to get them to do something? It's basically impossible. And I speak this from experience. Even just a couple of weeks ago, I was at a philosophy conference in Oxford, and the conference was wrapped up, and we were trying to just get people to go to the pub afterwards. And this proved to be a challenge. After about an hour of finally coddling people, we managed to get people to walk. People didn't really know where they were just following each other, didn't really know where they were going. But eventually, we managed to make it. We go to the bar. And then people get all the way there, and they get to the door, and then just stand there. They didn't have the initiative to think that maybe they ought to kind of open the door and go inside. And this is not just a funny story. It's actually the case that if you really want to achieve something, you've got certain problems that you think exist in the world, and you want to make progress on those problems. Having something that's more like an army is, it's a great thing to do, and that's for a variety of reasons. So, I mean, chief among them is kind of coordination among this community. So, if you've got people who all have the same goal and all have broadly the same beliefs about how to achieve that goal, it means you can have complete trust in this community. It means that you can just ask someone to do something, they're going to go and achieve that thing. You don't have to worry about someone going off and doing something quite different. And that's why kind of armies try to build conformity of belief and values, precisely so that there isn't kind of defection or people deserting. And so given this, I think it's actually the norm, what we should expect to be the default for kind of communities or social movements to move in a direction that's more like Sparta and less like Athens. And you can think about this if, within a kind of community or movement, there's going to be people growing organizations. And who are they going to want to hire? Well, they're going to want to hire people who have similar values, similar beliefs, because they're going to feel like they're going to get more done that way. Or who are they going to give kind of mentorship to? Again, people who they think will go on and do a similar amount of good from their perspective as they would have done. And that will be if they have the similar beliefs and similar values. So I think there's very strong pressure kind of pushing any sort of social movement in the direction of Sparta rather than the direction of Athens. And so the question for us isn't, well, which should we choose, but how can we kind of get the best of both worlds? And so I'll talk a little bit about how we can do this, because that's what I think we should be trying to do, combining the best of Athens and best of Sparta. So what I'm proposing is what we want to do is build an army of philosophers. And I think there's 3 ways you can do this. So the first and most important is this idea of having kind of conformity on the meta level and then disagreement on the object level. So when you think about, well, what is the definition of effective altruism? What does it mean? It's not about any particular object level belief. Instead, it's about kind of decision theoretic commitment, an epistemological commitment, and a values commitment. Decision theory is about maximizing. If you're trying to do good, it's about trying to do the most good and not satisfying for merely doing some amount of good. That's clearly part of the definition. Second, in terms of epistemology, it's about really taking the scientific method very seriously, having a very strong commitment to evidence and to careful reasoning. And broadly taking a kind of Bayesian probabilistic approach to this as well. And then third, in terms of values, the values that are embodied is kind of being impartial and being welfarist. So caring about all individuals equally. And potentially that's not just people, but non-human animals too, individuals in the future as well. And focusing, above all, on promoting the well-being of those individuals. And that's actually, these are substantive commitments. Most people in the world would reject kind of one of these commitments. So it's not the case that we're somehow this kind of all-encompassing thing. These are kind of serious, serious views we're staking our opinions on. But it's also the case that this is totally open in terms of what you end up concluding in terms of the problems that you think it's most important to solve and the means to solving them. And so even if you perhaps disagree with someone very strongly on some particular object level, you can know that ultimately the kind of guiding values are the same. A second way in which I think building a community can get the best of Athens and Sparta is in terms of having strong coordination norms between people. So part of the reason why there's this push to being a more Sparta-like community is because it allows people to coordinate very precisely. You can tell someone to do something, they're going to go and do it. You don't need to worry about checking up on them. But if we already have the sort of community or movement that has very deep kind of levels of trust, such that we know people aren't going to break promises, we know people aren't going to be dishonest, we know that even people with very different kind of object level views can still work together in a very productive way, then the benefits of being this more Sparta-like community with shared beliefs as well, those benefits go down. And I actually think this is something that effective altruism does extremely well as a community. There are people who have really kind of quite radically different views about the best way of improving the world, but everyone still comes together in EAG conferences and it doesn't erupt into a mass fistfight or anything. And then the final thing, which Gilles also mentioned, was having just a culture of kind of trust and safety. A culture where you can disagree with each other without being disagreeable. You don't take it as a threat to yourself or an insult if someone has a different view about the best way of making the world better, or where you can express views and not get kind of cast out for being a weirdo. And above all, where you can have what I call cognitive empathy. Really being able to understand that if someone has a different set of beliefs, really being able to understand what the world looks like kind of from their eyes. And so on that kind of latter note, I'm going to propose a little bit of a kind of experiment for you all to run over the course of this conference. So blogger Eliezer Yudkowsky once wrote a post called New Day. And the suggestion is just maybe even just once a year you have a new day where you just try and do nothing that you've done before. And he includes it, go to restaurants you haven't been to before, read websites you haven't read before. But there's just one aspect of it that I want to really focus on, which is this idea of just trying to have new thoughts, trying to see what the world is like if you believe something that you actually don't normally believe. And so the idea here is just, you've probably got this kind of full-fledged worldview, and some aspects of that are probably very important in terms of the career trajectory you're planning, your plans for improving the world. I suggest you just take kind of one of those fundamental beliefs and then really try and interrogate it over the course of this conference and think, well, what would the world be like if I didn't hold that belief? What if I believed the opposite? And so here are some examples to kind of get you going. These are some views that are commonly held within effective altruism. So long-termism is often a common view, the idea that most of the impact we have is not about the impact we have over the coming years, but perhaps over the coming hundreds of years. This idea in kind of population ethics, that it's good to have more people in the world if they've got kind of happier lives, at least putting overpopulation to the side. But the idea that there's serious risks of genuine catastrophe over the coming centuries. Similarly, some other ideas that we should be donating sooner rather than later, that the natural environment, biodiversity might be very instrumentally valuable, but perhaps don't have kind of value in and of themselves. This idea of what creatures are conscious, where perhaps insects, maybe people are unsure about insects, but other animals are generally conscious, but then kind of no further than that. And then in terms of the animal welfare wing as well, it's generally a kind of pretty key presumption that animals in factory farms don't have lives worth living. And so these are just some ideas, but probably you've got your own kind of worldview, and you want to think, well, what's some belief that I currently have, especially if it's something that's not as widely shared within effective altruism or in the wider world, and can I kind of really challenge that belief over the coming days? And one way to kind of not think about this is in terms of what Scott Alexander calls the 50 more Stalins type disagreement, where if there's something you already disagree with people about, perhaps you're very concerned about artificial intelligence, you think that there's serious risks about artificial intelligence and it might be coming very soon. Don't think, oh, well, maybe I'm going to believe it's even sooner than I thought. That doesn't really count as in the spirit of maybe this doesn't count in the spirit of this kind of exercise. And in my own case, I'm going to think, I have this kind of philosophical methodology for how we think about kind of moral matters, where in moral philosophy you often get this kind of clash between your intuitions about particular cases, just how things seem to you, but then what fits best with a kind of more theoretical approach. And I systematically kind of choose the more theoretical aspect. But at least I'm going to try and get myself into the headspace of thinking, well, what if I didn't take that approach? What if I thought that philosophical argument in general just isn't a very useful thing to do? this would mean that my entire career had been wasted. So kind of a hard thing for me to believe, practically speaking. But I'll at least going to try and give it a go. And here are some things that actions you might want to take on the basis of this. Where, if you go to a talk you agree with, perhaps think, well, supposing I actually had the opposite of this belief, what would I do? What would I think in response to this? What would be my objections be? Or find people who are in the conference who actually do disagree with you about this kind of foundational belief, and figure out why they believe the thing that they do. What's the worldview that's kind of supporting that alternative belief? Or, if you even want, just go to talks that you wouldn't normally go to, but it would make sense if you did hold the opposite of this belief. And then see, can you actually change your mind? Or, even if you think you're not going to change your mind, can you get this cognitive empathy? Can you really start to understand this alternative point of view such that you could represent it if someone were to ask you about it just as well as if you believed that position yourself? And so if you're able to do this, that would be a really big achievement. This is a very hard thing to do. But I think it's that kind of perspective of being aware of just how little we know, and being aware of the importance of being able to change our mind in light of new ideas and new arguments that makes kind of effective altruism so important. So I hope you have a wonderful conference. I'm looking forward to getting to meet many of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have no time for questions right now, but I actually changed my mind. Would you like to come on stage? We will answer one most important question because we are ahead of the time schedule. So who is the most important question for Will now to ask?
Wow.
Ooh.
This is you testing the coordination problems, because
it's very, very scary, of course, now to raise your hands. So who has a question? Yeah. Can you please stand up and say your name and your question, then I will repeat it.
My name is Ari. I wanted to ask you, what have you recently changed your mind on?
That's a great question.
I will repeat it first because we're recording this thing. So Ari is asking, what have you recently changed your mind on?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing recently is being worried about great power war. So in particular, war in the 21st century between either the US and Russia or the US and China. And, sorry, what did I say? US and Russia or US and China. Where if I just look at the kind of state of the world at the moment, I would think this is just never going to happen. It just seems so unlikely. We had kind of 70 years of of what historians call the long peace. But I recently read a book called Destined for War that made me appreciate kind of two things. One was just that war is just the normal state of human society. And the last 70 years are actually incredibly unusual from a historical perspective. And the second thing is that it's plausible, at least, although by no means guaranteed, that the reason why we've had the long peace is actually quite contingent. It's because of particular facts about the US being such a global power, or particular facts about the level of technology we're at, such that you get mutually assured destruction. And that might well, in fact, is quite likely to change over the course of the 21st century. So that was a really big update to me. I'm kind of still processing it. It's quite scary, sorry. It's maybe a low for the conference, but I'm sure we can do something about it. So that's the high, yay. But yeah, so that's been a big update for me recently.
Beautiful. I think we have time for one other question because I thought this was a brilliant question. Thank you so much. Who else has a question for Will? Yes.
Oh, to get it directly. Thank you. So I'm wondering, you were talking about strong coordination norms.
Mm-hmm.
I think this also is talking about the method that the whole EA community uses to talk within the community and outside of the community.
Yeah.
So one thing we see is these conferences, they happen a lot. There's blog posts.
Yeah.
What do you think is maybe a neglected way of communicating or sharing ideas in the community?
Okay, yeah, I think it's a great question, actually. And I think it is the case that there's no substitute really for in-person interaction. You just get it's just so much more kind of bandwidth than online. I think it is the case that I would like to see just more in the way of kind of online discussion. I think a lot of important discussion kind of does happen offline. So there might be, CEA is going to launch a kind of new revamped version of the forum in the coming months. And, at least when that happens, that's a nice kind of Schelling point at which perhaps we can kind of try and rejuvenate kind of online discussion and disagreement. And I think it's really possible that we could have like a really vibrant kind of online discussion there. And I think, obviously it's still happening, but it's a little bit neglected at the moment. So.
Cool, thank you so much. Give him another hand.
Cool, thank you.
Wonderful. Well, my mind has been really set for this conference right now, and I'm gonna definitely challenge my beliefs. But we also have another keynote speaker who maybe will change this again, or I don't know. She's gonna speak also, and her name is Natalie Cargill. She is the founder and executive director of Effective Giving UK. Before that, she also worked at Sentient Politics in Berlin. And a fun thing about her is not really about her, but about other people's beliefs about her, is that she is a barrister. And people thought that she was maybe working in a Starbucks or something. Because for non-natives, it's like a barista. It's like someone who makes coffee at the Starbucks. But she actually studied law, and give her a big hand.
Thank you. I was terrified for a second there. I didn't know what you were going to say when you said, here's a fun fact about her. Oh my gosh. So, thank you all for coming. I came here yesterday on the new direct Eurostar from London, which was amazing. So got on in the morning, slept through most of it, was here by lunchtime. It was incredible. I had a quick check, and apparently the same journey would have taken my medieval counterpart the best part of 2 weeks. And there probably wouldn't have been a conference for them to go to, but that's beside the point. I mean, the worst thing that happened to me was, as I was connecting to all the information in the world instantly via outer space on my phone, and then we went on a high-speed train under the sea, we lost connection. And, that was tough, but I got through it. So the world is pretty weird now. I booked those same tickets on my phone, and from that same phone, within minutes, I can share updates. Oh, clicker. There we go. I can share important updates about Lyra with everyone I've ever known. I can find things out. I can promote my preferred political candidates. I can share blog posts. I can share ideas with people I will never know. Probably so that other people I will never know will learn a lot about me and do things like send me direct ads for Eurostar trains. And because the wealth in the world is now so unequally distributed, and because I was born into a middle-class family in one of the richest countries in the world, and because we now have data on things that work and things that don't, I can also use my phone to do things like fund deworming programs at the cost of less than $2 per treatment. I can support cage-free campaigns to end factory farming, where $1 could save as many as 300 hens a year of suffering in factory farmed conditions. And for the cost of an international flight, I could potentially save someone's life by something as technologically simple as an insecticide-treated bed net. Okay, so take out your phones. Please take out your phones if you have them. Please don't read your notifications, because I can't compete with that many notifications. So you were also lucky enough to be born into circumstances of what's relatively extreme wealth. And more than that, you have the ability to affect the world, to learn about the world, to look things up, to test them, to know things, to spread ideas and to save lives, than potentially all of your ancestors combined. Alexander the Great may have conquered the so-called known world, but I think we probably know more about the world than he ever did. Sorry, Alexander. So hold that thought. Put your phone back, unless you've got something really important that I've now brought to your attention. Okay, so how did we get here? The very short answer is staggeringly quickly. Far, far more quickly than our brains could ever hope to catch up with. The short answer is this. Everything was really awful for basically all of human history. So imagine you were a normal human, a big ask potentially, normal in the sense of how humans have lived throughout most of history. You know, you can forget the chairs you're sitting in, the heating, the lighting, the promise of lunch after this talk. You can forget the prospect of a career doing something you love, making the world a better place. You'd be extremely poor, living on less than $1 a day. You'd be chronically malnourished, vulnerable to disease. And it would just be out of the question that you or anyone else you know could challenge the people that govern you, or challenge the ideas that govern them, or find out about what's going on right now the other side of the planet. One thing that really brings home to me just how bad the past is, because I have a really terrible fear of dentists, is just the idea of dentistry without anesthetic. People think, oh, I'd love to go back to another age, and I just think dentistry without anesthetic. No, you really wouldn't. I mean, today we still, a shocking number of people in the world live in circumstances of extreme poverty. And it's shocking. And for almost all of human history, that was the norm. Okay. Then this happened. The Industrial Revolution was perhaps the most important event in recorded history. Average income skyrocketed. And it wasn't just wealth that grew, because wealth, of course, is only a proxy for other things that we care about. Over the long-term, life expectancy, energy usage, percentage of people living in a democracy have all grown rapidly. And the percentage of people living in poverty has similarly decreased rapidly. So if it feels like we're living in strange times as we, zip on high-speed trains under the sea connected to the internet, it's because we really are living in really strange times. So what does this mean? The fact that we were just coasting along a flat road of misery and now seem to have these rocket launchers attached to humanity's progress. What does it mean at a conference about improving lives, making the world better? I think it means the stakes are really high. On the one hand, if we get it together and governments and NGOs and civil society use their resources wisely, there's a potential to really solve problems that have been around for so long they seem just part of the way things are. Take global poverty, for example. Given how unequally the wealth is distributed, if the world's richest 10%, which includes us, donated just 10% of their income, and we pulled that together and we put it to effective use, we could do so much. By some estimates, and these are very crude estimates, it would take just 5% of the first year of spending, 5% of the first year to end extreme poverty. It would take just 0.5% of the first year of spending to provide every person at risk of malaria with insecticide-treated bed nets. And it would take just 0.25% of the first year of spending to treat the world's poorest 2 billion for parasitic infections, which would leave around 95% left to figure out all the other pressing problems that we should work on and which we'll come to. And of course, that's just what we can do with old technology. What about the stuff we're developing now? What about CRISPR, gene editing? That could be used to realistically end malaria forever, saving millions of lives. Cellular agriculture. If that can reduce factory farming, even by a small amount, that's a fraction of the 80 billion land animals a year that suffer in really what are torturous conditions on factory farms. And geoengineering, I think that image I chose looks a bit more ominous than I meant it to. If we do it right, could be one way of helping to mitigate the risk of catastrophic climate change. And I mean, if we think beyond that, there really isn't any reason why we can't aim for a world where suffering, misery, disease, drudgery are things of the past. But only if we make it. So alongside these huge potentials, is equally huge risks. And I think they actually might be larger and much more hidden than we think. So if we go back to this graph from earlier, look at the purple line. That charts war-making capacity, which is an estimate of military power by a historian called Ian Morris. And our capacity for self-destruction is also at unprecedented levels. So the issue really is, every time we discover a powerful new technology, which we're doing all the time, in all likelihood, it will either be beneficial or neutral. But every time we discover a powerful new technology, there is always the chance that this is the technology that has more destructive power than we're able to handle. And we don't have to go into weird sci-fi futuristic scenarios to see that this is the case, because we're already living it. This is the famous 1939 letter sent from Einstein to Roosevelt, warning him of the possibility of a new and powerful weapon. And of course, a few years later, these weapons were indeed constructed. And in little more than a decade, we had enough of them to destroy Earth many, many times over. And this is new. We're in a new age where the actions of a handful of individuals could result in the end of the lives of billions of individuals. This is not something we've ever had the power to do before. Even the most bloodthirsty warlords of medieval times could not make decisions that could end so catastrophically. And so far, we've been really lucky. We've all had North Korea's nuclear program on our minds, but that is just the latest chapter in a long and terrifying saga of near misses. If you want to feel both really lucky and really terrified, read this Wikipedia page. And of course, nuclear war is just one of the risks we need to manage. Scientifically engineered pathogens, for example, they have the potential to kill millions or even billions of people. We can't be confident that we're ready for radically transformative technology, such as artificial general intelligence. And yet, just like nuclear weapons in 1939, these technologies are being developed. Okay, I'm not a doomsayer. I don't expect, in all likelihood, any of these risks to materialize. I am putting money into my pension, theoretically anyway. But I do think these risks are incredibly important and incredibly neglected. This is a 2008 poll carried out by professors at the University of Oxford. They found that a catastrophe within the century that kills 1 billion people, or that kills everyone, might be as likely as rolling 6 on a die. Now, these numbers are old, and they were collected at a conference on catastrophic risk. But even if that risk were half as small, if it were 10 times as small, mitigating catastrophes on this scale could still be the most important thing that we could do. Because the management planners at Fukushima power plant, they also didn't expect the tragic disaster of 2011, which resulted in the death of 1,600 people. At the time, the risk of a huge catastrophe was really small. It was very small, and so it wasn't taken very seriously. But because so much was at stake, I think those planners owed a duty to take even small risks extremely seriously. And we might also owe those same duties in respect of preventing global catastrophe. And thankfully, leaders such as Bill Gates and Elon Musk agree, and research is underway in institutes in Oxford, MIT, Cambridge, and elsewhere. But it's not yet enough. Okay, so where does all this leave us? I think it leaves us with an open question, a really important open question that could be the moral and intellectual project of this generation. How do we use our resources to help as many individuals as we can while navigating through this exceptionally dangerous time in history? I don't know. But I'm just going to say 2 things about how we could approach this question. Thing 1, approach your intuitions with suspicion. Okay, so right now, there is a compelling drama going on in the minds of all of us, with 2 star characters. Got System 1, impulsive, automatic, intuitive, excitingly named, and the System 2, thoughtful, deliberate, calculating. And as they play off against each other, their interaction determines how we think and how we make decisions. So, System 1 operates often without conscious control. And this makes sense in light of our evolutionary history. Thinking hard is hard. We prefer to avoid it where possible. And in the evolutionary environment, when you're being chased by a predator, you haven't got time to stop and think, what's the best thing to do now? You need to think fast. And so we developed a bundle of shortcuts, known as heuristics, to make these quick and easy decisions. System 2 is like me saying, can you spot the woman in the crowd with the green spotted dress? Okay, she's over here. But that's System 2 processing. You're looking at options, you're thinking carefully, you're exercising conscious control over your choices. The problem is that because we still have exactly the same brains as our ancestors, we tend to apply System 1 where really we shouldn't. And in fact, System 2 would be more appropriate. And as a result, we make very predictable, very systematic errors in reasoning. So, for example, when we're left to our own devices, we do things such as judge how likely something is based on how easily we can recall examples of it. So we think things like shark attacks and murders are far more common than they are, and we underestimate large risks that we've never encountered. We believe that we knew it all along, even when really unlikely things happen. And this can cause us to vastly underestimate the cost of preventing catastrophe. Because in hindsight, when something goes wrong, something goes catastrophically wrong, we work out what caused it. And we think, it was that thing. Well, that thing would have been really easy and really cheap to, if we'd just done this. But before the fact, we don't know what's going to go wrong. And we need to make sure that none of the things which could go wrong. And that's a much harder, much more expensive project. We're also just really, really terrible at thinking in large numbers. In the evolutionary environment, there were not millions of things or billions of things. You're not going to be faced with a herd of 1 billion buffalo at any point. It wasn't something that we learned to think properly about. There was a famous experiment, which I'm sure many of you have heard, where 3 groups of people were asked, how much would you pay to save? The first group was told 2,000 birds, second group 20,000, third group 200,000, and all groups would pay around $80. So the actual scope of the altruistic action had no real effect on our willingness to pay. And orders of magnitude are really important when we're thinking about high stakes decisions. For example, 1,000x, which is what we could be talking about here, is the difference between 12 days and 37 years. So yeah, no, that's the difference between 1 million and 1 billion. It's a shame the words are so similar sounding. And of course, there are many, many other errors in reasoning that we need to guard against. This is not to say intuition is terrible and we should never rely on our intuitions. We would never get anything done if we were constantly calculating what the next move should be. But the research indicates that intuition seems to work best in environments where the situation is stable, we have clear feedback on how we're doing, and we have loads of opportunities to practice. So things like playing chess. You play chess for a lifetime, you're going to have some great intuitions about the next move. That is not the world we're living in, as we've seen. Intuition is also a terrible way to think about who deserves moral consideration when we're figuring out who to help. History is full of cases where entire populations were marginalized, mistreated, deprived of basic rights, ignored, for reasons that fit with the conventional morality of the time, but now seem completely indefensible. Yeah, this is some anti-suffragette literature that I found on a blog that really, wasn't good for my stress levels for half an hour yesterday. The history is not composed of evil people. People didn't go around with this sneaking suspicion that maybe they were doing something terrible. These things felt normal. They were normal. Aristotle spent the best part of his life trying to figure out what it meant to be a moral person and never once concluded that slavery might be wrong. So I think it's important that we ask ourselves, as part of this project, using our system too, what moral catastrophes could we be perpetrating today? Who are we not considering that we should consider? Could it be the horror show of factory farming? Could it be the way we enforce our borders? Could it be the way we incarcerate people in the so-called war on drugs? Because it's almost certainly something. Because, I mean, what are the chances that we are the generation who has finally figured everything out? Okay, thing two. When we do apply reasoning and careful analysis to doing better, some actions are way, way, way more impactful than others. This is Norman Borlaug. He was an American scientist interested in agriculture. He died in 2009. Funded by philanthropists, he helped to discover a new type of high-yielding, disease-resistant dwarf wheat. This kick-started the renovation of agricultural practices, known as the Green Revolution. And some have estimated that over 1 billion lives were saved by averting mass famine. Norman was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for greatly reducing the chance of conflict between India and Pakistan. Not bad for a life's work. But somebody with Norman's skills, with his intelligence, with his drive, with his passion, could have very easily applied themselves to a different problem, perhaps a problem already crowded with the best scientists working on it, or a different intervention, which if we'd simply tested it, we would know that it didn't work. And he could have applied the same amount of effort to achieve essentially nothing. So how can we avoid this? Or rather, how can we maximize the chances of our efforts being as spectacularly successful as Norman's? This is another one I don't really know the answer to, but I think the key is in prioritizing and internalizing the orders of magnitude difference between different actions that we can take. Okay, so when we think about how we want to impact the world with our time, with our money, with both, we can ask some really simple questions. What problems do I want to work on? What approaches to solving those problems work best? Who should actually be doing that? We can start with what problem to work on. So we want to work on problems that are the most pressing. By pressing, we mean strong on some of the following criteria, some combination of the following 3 criteria. So first of all, importance. Ask how important is this problem? If we solved it, how many people would be helped and by how much? It's obvious that the larger the scale of the problem, all things being equal, the greater our potential for impact. Secondly, neglectedness. How many resources are already being effectively used to solve this problem? Because of course, the more people fighting to solve an issue in an area, the less likely it is that your additional impact is going to be the one that makes a difference. And solvability. Can we actually make progress on this problem? A good proxy question for this is, if we doubled the resources going to an area, how much progress would we expect to make? When we apply these criteria, we see that some global problems really stand out as being extremely pressing, 10 or 100 times more pressing than ones that we might come to had we not carefully reflected. By the way, one of these problems, of course, is figuring out what we've missed, what priorities we haven't yet identified. And then we can do the same thing with which approach to take. Very few approaches have been tested for how impactful they might be, but of those few that have, it seems fair to say that up to 60% just don't work. So that's more than half don't work. And of those that do work, only a smaller number still will be truly exceptional. And finally, choosing the right organization to support, or the right place to direct your efforts. The research indicates that the most productive people working in a field can be around 10 times as valuable as the least productive. So if we add these variables together, assuming they're all roughly uncorrelated, I think it becomes easier to internalize just how important it is to prioritize. So we haven't come to terms with this yet. At Effective Giving, the area we specialize in is philanthropy. And it seems that people aren't averse to giving. A recent poll found that 90% of Americans make some gift to charity. Around half of this money goes to education and religious groups in the US. and around 10% goes to the global poor, where the money would go further. Almost everyone, so 85%, say they care about the performance of the non-profit they donate to. I did wonder about that 15% on the survey who were just like, nah, don't really mind. But only about a third of donors ever do any research on where they're going to give. Of those that do research, only 2/3 of them are only doing that research to validate the choices that they've already made. And only 3% of donors, it seems, do comparative research to find the best thing to give their money to impact the world. And I think in many ways this is understandable, because giving away money is old, but using careful reasoning to figure out how to do it best is very new. So for the richest and most powerful society in history, I think our brains have a lot of catching up to do. And just as the scientific revolution was the search for truth using evidence and reason, we now need the search for the actions that do the most good using evidence and reason. We're not limited to one cause area. We're not limited to any conclusions. This is an open question. We're not limited to any certain types of evidence. This is overall a project about finding the best ways to help. And then, and this is the really crucial part, going out there and actually doing them. Thank you.
So, we're actually super duper effective at time management. We're still ahead of schedule. I don't think I've ever seen this at the conference ever. So we have time for questions. So again, do we have a question for Natalie here? Not all together. I see there's something behind this pillar, or... Ah, yeah, there we go. I run to you.
Hi, thanks for the great talk. So when people mention how people might be missing some moral catastrophe, they tend to list potential moral catastrophes that EAs are already worried about, right? Like animal farming or something like this. Yeah. Do you think there's a significant chance that effective altruists are missing some moral atrocity that we just haven't noticed?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the same reasoning applies, right? What are the chances that effective altruism or anyone at this stage has got everything figured out? Absolutely. And I think it should be an important... Oh, is this on? Oh, it is. Basically, yes. Yeah, I really don't think we've figured it all out at this point, no.
That's a very clear answer. Anyone else a question with a more complex answer, maybe? It's good I'm not wearing heels today because I have to run very far. Here we go.
Thanks for the talk. It was really good. So one thing I was wondering about is often we think a lot about like catastrophic risks for the world or something. Mm-hmm. Is there something like a catastrophic risk for the EA community as a whole? Like which factors could, I know, eradicate the EA movement and having like, I don't know, very bad reputational effect in which people will just feel estranged from the movement or will stop to grow or anything like that? How much EA should worry about it?
Yeah, that's a good question and a hard question. And I don't know the answer. I think I can definitely see, looking back to social movements in the past, like things that have led them to decline. And we should be wary of that. But yeah, I'm not thinking of any specific EAX risk. I don't know if anyone else has some thoughts on that. Yeah, Robert?
Not staying curious.
Yeah, not staying curious.
I think one of the things could be being too young and homogeneous.
Yeah, I think
we're still quite young, and some people are already thinking about changing things according to the EA movement. I think the world who isn't EA has a lot to offer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's the case.
Good.
So in effective altruism, we always say we use reason and evidence, and that sounds very sexy because we don't make any judgments about things. We're kind of neutral. But oftentimes you have cases where the evidence is weak, or you have to make a judgment. And how do we deal with these cases? How, when we do advisory, for example, for philanthropists?
Yeah, the term evidence-based is difficult, because I think for some interventions in global health, for example, RCTs, that was radically revolutionary to have that kind of, statistical significance and to use that to make decisions. That's not going to work for a lot of other things. But I think that's why I prefer to use the term careful analysis and reasoning. So, following priors, updating where appropriate, thinking in terms of expected value. And these are not just sort of questions about how to think probabilistically, but also think about, well, what matters? What is it that we want to achieve? And just use reasoning and analysis rather than any particular type of evidence. So yeah, for that reason, I think it's not entirely accurate to say we're interested in evidence-based philanthropy, unless evidence is just everything that you interact with in the world correctly updated with all your prior beliefs. So it's difficult.
Okay, the very last question. So think about it carefully. I'm going to go for the person here, otherwise I end up too sweaty here. So.
Thank you for the presentation, and I think with this audience, all your arguments made very much sense, and we all agree on what you say. But how about confronting the other people in the world with this message? What problems do you encounter with?
The other people in the world. I think people are very receptive to these ideas. I don't talk to people and say, hello, I'm an ambassador of effective altruism. I think these are just statements that we can make about the world. And when people, I've had discussions about existential risk or about cause prioritization or about the need for evidence. And these are reasonable claims, I think. And yeah, they've been received well. I think it's a matter of just explaining them well and continuing to learn and being really clear to emphasize that this is not an ideology, this is not an answer. This really is just a question and a way of approaching it that seems reasonable.
Okay, I think this is it. Thank you very much.
Thank
Give
you
her
so
one
much.
more hand. So I still see that there's a lot more engagement, a lot more eagerness to ask questions. No worries, we catered for that. So there's 3 ways in which you can find the speakers for asking more questions. Of course, 1, just grab them in the break. 2, also we have actually speakers office. So on the schedule, you can find time slots in which you can really engage one-on-one and ask questions and have discussions with the keynote speakers of today. And also we have on the Facebook group of this event, we've posted a post where we say you can post your questions there, and then we'll go find the answers with the keynote speakers for you. Yeah, so there's definitely some ways in which to engage still. Then we're done with the plenary session, so we're going to go into the afternoon program. It's chock full with a lot of exciting things you can do. You can mix and match according to your preferences. So make sure you look into the schedule. What's very important, it's first come, first serve. So make sure that if you really want to go, be there in time and be there first. Yeah, so check out your schedules. Then I have a list of what practical matters. So I promise you this is the very last thing. It's going to be the most boring part of this whole conference, but we have to go through it. So first of all, to stay all happy and healthy, it's going to be a very hot day. So for drinks, there's taps around the entire place, so you can refill your taps everywhere for free. If you don't have a bottle of water, there's an action outside here where you can get a bottle and refill. Also, if you have some questions, first ask your neighbor. If your neighbor doesn't know it, you can find all the volunteers. Volunteers, can you stand up? Like everybody with the blue shirts. Also give them a hand because they really made this event. And they're also very easy to find, as you can see, they're all blue. So. Then also we have a code of conduct. Of course, we expect everybody to treat each other with respect and care. If there's something happens that you really want to share a complaint about, you can find Stan or Denisa. Can you stand up, Stan and Denisa? Red dress, the girl with the red dress, the only red dress, so easy to find. And where's Stan? I don't see him. There, over there. There we go. Yeah, this pole in the middle. Oh gosh. All right, the lunch will be ready at 1. It's all vegan. And last but not least, for the dinner tonight, you got a spreadsheet in your mailbox. Make sure you sign up there. if you want to join a dinner, and you have to pay for it yourself. Unfortunately, we don't have a massive budget yet. We're working on that. And then we have one more thing. So throughout the conference, we want to install this one room. And I think some of you have heard of it. It's one of my favorite art of hosting tools. But if there's a very busy group of people, some of us will raise our hands. And then the moment you see somebody raising your hand, make sure you also raise your hand and close your mouth. Yeah. So it's at the same time. The moment you see somebody else raising your hand, you also raise your hand. So what it does is very quickly get everybody quiet so we can move on. Yeah. So we don't have to go run around screaming. So I think this is it for today. I just wanted to, because I got a bit overwhelmed by all the very horrible doom scenarios and the massive tests that we have ahead of a group. But I had to think of one of my favorite anthropologists. I studied a bit of anthropology. I know, not one of those data scientists. And I just want to share that with you because I think it's a very encouraging one. So it's from Margaret Mead. And she said that never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing it ever had. Okay, guys. With that, I leave you. Go ahead and enjoy the conference. Oh, I forget one thing.
But I won't leave you yet because I really want to pinpoint one thing. It's almost 11:30, so we're still in time. At 12, the first round of workshops and lectures and things are starting. So if you want to be at one particular thing, then you also have to be there first because if it's full, you know. So really try to be there on time. And then we will have a long lunch break, and then we will have another session like this. And at the end of the day, we will come back here. So that's just really important. And one other thing that I think Robin didn't mention yet is we have EA ambassadors. So there's some EA ambassadors, maybe all of us are, but some people here are more for, if you want to have a talk about EA and not really dive deep into all the whatever stuff that you are not so interested in, but you would like to have more like an introduction or an open chat about EA in general, you can talk with them. So maybe the EA ambassadors can stand up for a second. Those are local leaders of groups throughout Europe. So you can find them as well, some with a blue shirt. So please talk with them if you have any other questions. And now it is 2 minutes to go, and you're allowed to have your break, and we'll continue at 12.